All right, let's talk about one of the trickiest areas in medical coding, something that can stump even the pros: abortions and ectopic pregnancies. But don't you worry, we're going to break this all down piece by piece, sticking to the official guidelines so you can code these encounters with total confidence. Okay, here's our game plan. We'll start with the foundational terms you've got to know. Then we'll jump into the different types of abortion codes and the whole complete versus incomplete question. After that, we'll tackle some of those weird special cases and wrap up with ectopic pregnancies and how to code the actual procedures. First things first, we have to be speaking the same language. Getting these official definitions down is non-negotiable for accurate coding, so let's lock them in. Okay. This is the big one. The key thing to burn into your brain here is the 20-week mark. That is the bright line in the sand. If the pregnancy loss happens before 20 completed weeks, we're in abortion coding territory. After that, it's a whole different chapter, a completely different set of codes. Ectopic pregnancy. Seems pretty straightforward, right? But here's where it gets kind of cool. The codes for this are incredibly specific. I mean, they can tell you exactly where the implantation happened: fallopian tube, ovary, cervix, even in the abdomen. It's pretty amazing detail. And then we have a molar pregnancy. This is another type of non-viable pregnancy, and you guessed it, it gets its own unique section in the codebook. Being able to spot this in the documentation is crucial for coding precision. Okay, now let's get into the nitty-gritty. When you're looking at a chart for an abortion, the very first question you have to answer is, what type of abortion are we dealing with? This decision right here dictates the entire path you're going to take. Everything, and I mean everything, is going to fall into one of these three buckets. Was it spontaneous? Was it a complication that happened after an induced termination? Or was it a failed attempt to terminate? You have to nail this first step. Now, the most common type you're going to encounter is spontaneous abortion, what some people call a miscarriage. The key here is in the name: spontaneous. It happens on its own without any medical intervention to start the process. All right, this is where we start to add some layers and really get specific. Once we know the type, the next big question we have to ask is, was the abortion complete or incomplete? This is a critical distinction. So what's the difference? It all comes down to one thing: are there retained products of conception? Now here is a pro tip, a really common mistake. Just because a D&C was performed does not automatically mean it was an incomplete abortion. You have to see those magic words in the physician's documentation. Don't assume. Okay, let's work through a classic real-world case. We've got a patient with an incomplete spontaneous abortion. A D&C is done to remove retained products. But then an infection develops. How are we going to code this whole encounter? So what do you think? Put on your coder hat. How do you assign the codes to make sure you're telling the complete and accurate story of what happened to this patient? And the answer is 03.0. This is a perfect example of a combination code. Check it out. One single code tells us both that it was an incomplete spontaneous abortion and that there was a genital tract and pelvic infection. How efficient is that? It's awesome. So we've got the basics down, but let's be honest, not every case that crosses your desk is going to be that straightforward. So let's dive into some of the trickier scenarios you're bound to run into. We're talking about situations where an abortion is done because of the mother's health, or maybe an accidental abortion happens because of trauma. There are even rules for the rare case of an abortion that results in a live birth. These all require very careful coding. Now, look at this example. The really important detail here is the reason for the abortion. It's being done to protect the mother's health due to her severe heart disease. This why is a massive piece of the coding puzzle. So how do you code that? Well, you can't tell the whole story with just one code. You actually need two. First, Z33.2, which is the code for the encounter itself. But then you need a second code, O99.411, to explain why: because a disease of the circulatory system was complicating the pregnancy. You need both to paint the full picture. All right, time to switch gears again. Let's talk about those other abnormal pregnancies we mentioned at the start: ectopic and molar pregnancies. These are treated very differently in the codebook. They're not coded as spontaneous abortions at all. These conditions each have their own specific home. O00 is for ectopic, O01 is for a hydatiform mole, and O02 covers other things like a blighted ovum. And remember, for that O00 category, for ectopic pregnancies, that's where you'll often use a fifth or sixth character to specify the exact location. Here's another term you'll definitely see: a missed abortion. This is a very specific situation where fetal death has occurred before that 20-week mark, but the products of conception have not been expelled yet. That gets coded to O2.1. It's just another reminder that all these abnormal pregnancies have their own very specific address in the codebook. Okay, so far we've been living entirely in the world of diagnosis codes. But what about the actual procedure? For inpatient hospital coding, we have to switch over to a completely different system, ICD-10 PCS. PCS codes are all about building. It's a 7-character system, and you can think of each character as a building block. You select an option for each of the 7 slots to construct a code that describes exactly what procedure was performed, with incredible detail. Let's just walk through one to see how it works. Each of these 7 characters has a very specific job. The 1 tells us we're in the obstetrician section. The A tells us the root operation was an abortion. The 7 tells us the approach was via a natural or artificial opening. And that last character, W, gets even more granular, telling us that laminaria was the substance used to induce it. Isn't that wild? 7 characters tell the entire procedural story. So, after all of this, what's the one thing that matters most? The single most critical piece of the puzzle? It's the documentation. It has to be crystal clear, specific, and unambiguous. Without that precise language from the physician, you're just guessing. Great coding always starts with great documentation. It's the only way to get the patient's story right.